Today, we're going to be talking about how to improve your commander decks that may or may not be wacky while still keeping the awesome synergy that you want in the deck.
I'm Mia, and I love Sphinx's tutelage.
I'm BZ. My decks never seem to have enough win cons in them. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. You're going to go to Card Kingdom, you're going to log into your account, you're going to go to the Nitpicking Nerds page in the description. Then you're going to check out and buy whatever stuff you want. They've got it. Whatever you want, it's there. Buy it all. Put it in the cart. It ships to your house all at the same time. Boom, you get it in one package. You think, wow, it's all to here. It's exactly how I wanted it. Thanks, Card Kingdom. No problem.
They have awesome stock, they have fast shipping, and $50 or more gets you free shipping. So you should use our link and tell them we sent you because it really helps us out.
Helps you out.
We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds.
I check out, you save 5% of your real tax dollars on your entire order, which includes our own sleeves. Yes, you can get Nitpicking Nerds sleeves with Amber or our logo on the sleeves if you type in Nitpicking Nerds directly into Dragon Shield's website.
So cool that they've integrated us and Dragon Shield together on the same website. Head over there because there's some awesome sleeves waiting for you. And we also are sponsored by Moxfield later. Not yet. And we have a Patreon if you want to go see exclusive long-form gameplays with all of the table talk in, some other cool perks. You want to see behind-the-scenes photos? You got to check it out because that's what Blitzflix and John Copeland are doing. So we're diving in and we're going to be looking at how to improve your decks while also keeping synergy, not giving up, not compromising on all the fun, cool stuff you want to play, but still being able to like draw cards and remove things and end the game. And what better way to do that than by looking at 3 different real decks and talking about how to do just that, featuring our patrons.
There's so many ways to be able to play synergistic pieces that are awesome without putting in super staples like Rhystic Study or Trouble in Pairs. The first deck we're going to be looking at is Blitzflix's, and this is Narset, Enlightened Exile. This is a bracket 2 deck. 1 red, blue, white for a 3/4. Creatures you control have prowess. Whenever she attacks, you exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than her power from a graveyard and copy it. You can cast the copy without paying its mana cost. I love the Jeskai punchy decks because I think it takes a nice spin on it while also keeping very Spellslinger attributes.
Yeah, Spellslinger can get a little, I don't know, repetitive or drawn out. I like the assertive take on it where you're like, yeah, my creatures get +1/+1. This deck's game plan is to get aggressive with spellslinging, but we're just spellslinging with like cantrips that target creatures to make them a little bit better or give them haste or something. And then we're going to use Narset alongside other backup payoffs to attack for massive damage, ideally with creatures that already have prowess. So it's like they have prowess and Narset gives prowess, and you're just stacking it, and you're going to cast like 3 or 4 things off of it and then just kill. Realistically, I think this deck's going to kill like 1.5 players every time it engages in a big combat.
It's just tough with these types of decks because you want spell slingy type things, so you want a lot of non-creature spells, but you need enough creatures to be able to hit with. If you don't, you're going to be ending up on Narset, like relying on Narset a lot. And while that's very cool for some decks, sometimes being that more Voltron strategy makes you very susceptible to removal, and then your deck just doesn't function the way you want it to.
Yeah, so Blitzflix was worried about over-relying on Narset, and then we need to make sure that there's alternate plans, which I think this deck does have a few of, and we want to avoid super staples because I think if you're trying to rock at bracket 2, which we want to stay in this bracket, you just don't. I don't really want game changers. I'm happy building my synergy deck, and I don't necessarily need the things that are just good all over the place. An optimal start for this deck, in case you're wondering, we're dropping prowess dudes for the first 3 turns. Ideally 1, 2, and 3. Realistically 2 and 3, and then Narset's going to be turn 4, and then after that, we're already ready to go. We're going to make huge things, huge creatures, huge connections. The creatures themselves are going to either create more creatures or create value so that we can just sort of keep attacking and put a lot of pressure on people early. People don't like to play things that are affecting the board on the first 4 turns. And that's when you're going to profit.
Yeah, you're going to be able to punch in and maybe even sneak in a couple actual prowess triggers if you have like a mana rock or something like that too.
Yeah, one weird thing with Narset that I just wanted to note for people who maybe want to play her is when you use Narset's ability when she attacks, you exile a spell from your graveyard, then you copy the card, and then you cast it, resulting in only 1 Magecraft trigger. Magecraft is weirdly worded, and copying cards versus spells is a little tricky, but basically you only get 1 Magecraft trigger, even though it looks like you might get 2 on first glance. So that's something to note. It doesn't mean we're cutting all the Magecraft cards, but that's just a random Narset fact that I don't know when else in my life I would share with anybody, if not now.
We're going to run through 10 cuts and 10 adds so we can make this deck run better and actually up synergy. The first one we're going to cut is Narset, but not the commander, the other Narset in the deck. I feel like this Narset is always akin in my mind to like kill this or we will die immediately because you're going to flip big stuff off the top. However, there are 58 creatures and lands in this deck, which makes a lot of bad hits.
Yeah, that means each hit you're more than 50% to whiff. But then you also have to look at like, what are we hitting? And a lot of it is like aggressive sort of combat trick type things that are going to maybe like draw you a card, cantrips, maybe some mild power boost, probably removal. There's a lot of removal in here. And I do think Narset Enlightenment Master does what this deck wants to do. I just think it's a little too slow. The curve for this deck, Blitzflix, is cooking. This curve is so responsible, but I think we're going to shave it down even a little bit more with some of these cuts and really focus in on beating people up and getting on board, staying ahead on board, and just winning with our awesome aggro. But I think Narset just comes down really late, and there's a lot of potential whiffs in the deck for it that I'm just a little off of it. You know, there's no extra combats, there's no extra turns in here, there's no whammies where you hit them and you feel like you win. It's always just going to be, hey, that was like pretty good. I got 6 prowess triggers and I drew 2 cards.
I feel like at that high CMC, you need to either be winning with that or very, very close to winning. And having more than a half chance to whiff on this feels really bad.
Yeah, the next cut, we're going to go cuts, all the cuts, and then all of the adds. The next cut is Isochron Scepter. There's 15 targets in this deck for the Isochron Scepter. That feels pretty low. There's no tutors, really. We're not like, there's no mystical tutor. We're not doing that. And there's also no infinites. And there's not even that many counter spells in the deck, which may or may not be something we address. But that, to me, adds up to a pretty underwhelming Isochron Scepter. I get the appeal because it is a non-creature spell and that it will cast non-creature spells exclusively, but I think there's too much setup and not enough payoff.
I also feel like with Isochron Scepter, you become the target immediately because people are so accustomed to Isochron Scepter being like, okay, so are we dead or what's going on? And I feel like not only are there not enough targets to make this worth it, but also it might make you a target, and in bracket 2 you really don't need that heat on you.
Yeah, I mean, you play Isochron Scepter and you implement a combat trick, no one's going to try to kill you, but I think when I think of Isochron Scepter, I think there might be other combos in your deck. So that's like a mild thing, but it's something to consider. Also, Baral and Carry Zev. This to me doesn't seem like it's got enough juice. It doesn't feel aggressive enough. It's, you can cast other stuff from your hand when you cast instants and sorceries, but I think there's just room to be made for it. Ultimately, I don't have a lot to say about it, and that's probably just why we're cutting it. And next I have to move on to the most controversial cuts, something that I have done personally, and I've been pretty happy with. I have a red-blue Spellslinger with a heavy inclination to beat down rather than just dirtle forever, and that deck doesn't really like signets. And so, Blitzflix, I'm thinking we cut Arcane Signet, I'm thinking we cut Felwar Stone, and I'm thinking we cut Talisman of Creativity. Those were the only mana rocks in the deck, and I think you've already sort of shaved down a little bit. This deck has access, the Spellslinger decks have access to 2 mana ramp, but it takes the form of like Baral. Baral's in here, Electromancer, the Mentor from Bloomburrow, the Stormcatch Mentor, there we go. And like all that stuff, Haughty Jin even in some cases, and not necessarily all of them are in here, but that's what you have access to. And I think I have been so underwhelmed with these signets when I'm trying to actually get on the board in the first 3 turns. I don't think turn 2 Signet, turn 3 Narset, I don't think that's very good for this deck.
Yeah, I feel like I also have been experiencing this, but not in a Spellslinger deck, but in Mendicant Core, because my curve is so low. It's like, what are you ramping into? And if you're not trying to ramp into these like 6, 7, 8, 9 drops as fast or as fast as possible, then you don't really need as many mana rocks to be getting there if your curve is, mostly 1, 2, 3, maybe a 4 sprinkled in here and there.
Yeah, so I think this deck is a little bit more dramatically skewed towards the first 4 turns than most decks, but something to consider. I mean, Blitzflix, I love this deck because this deck has like 5 cards that cost more than 4. And spoiler alert, we just cut Narset and I've got some more on the line. So we're even lowering the curve further. I'll tell you how much we lower it, but I think lowering the curve and just focusing on creature, Narset, and then we beat down forever. Maybe we back it up with some other stuff. I think that's going to be a really great way to succeed while also keeping the core of the deck intact and not having like secretly awkward draws, where you draw a Talisman in the mid-game.
Yeah.
Like, well, this sucks, but I'm not going to cut Talismans. But in this case, we are going to cut Talismans.
Yeah, it's like it counts as a prowess trigger, but it's not really what you want to see. You'd rather be getting a combat trick or something else like that. The next one is Irenicus's Vile Duplication. This is a high mana cost, and I don't really think this deck really cares about copies that often.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit clunky, a little bit slow. It feels like it adds a turn to the timer of waiting for your awesome turn to go off, where if you have Narset and 2 prowess things and 2 tokens, I don't want to play this. I just want to go off or cast 4 spells and deal a bunch of damage. I think it opens you up for A, spot removal, but B, saying just you wait till I untap too many times and then dying.
Yeah, I feel like that is one of the problems of bracket 2 decks where you're like, just you wait, and then you're just putting off your win one turn, another turn, another turn, and then someone else stole the win right under your nose.
Yeah, one of the other themes in this deck was it makes a lot of creatures with prowess and has a lot of creature token makers where the tokens have prowess. So that's why Elemental Eruption is in here as a top end, 4/4 dragons with prowess, and this spell has Storm. I don't think this deck can get that much of a storm count off a 6-drop, though. We don't really have rituals. We don't really have, like, suspend cards or plot cards. I don't see how we can get more than, realistically, 2 tokens off of this. And in that case, I cut it for a much worse-looking card, but a card that I think will just be castable and better as we get into it.
We'll explain that later, though. And one of my babies, Farewell, has to go, too.
Has to go.
I mean, it's 6 mana, which definitely messes up your curve a little bit because your curve is so low here. And just, it's not what you really want to be doing because, yeah, it counts for prowess, but you want to probably just be trying to beat in with creatures instead of just wiping everything and restarting from 0.
Yeah, I think Farewell's great when you're okay choosing all modes, but this deck wants to keep its graveyard from Narset. And it rarely is going to want to hit creatures unless it's very far behind. But I think let's just cut it, and then we can even take that board wipe slot and turn that into I can play this card and still wipe the board while being ahead, and then I just win the game because none of my creatures go away. And the last one was Intervene. It counters a spell that targets one of your dudes. And I don't think these cards are ever really what you want in blue decks. I think I'd rather just play a hard counter spell. Feather is in here as like a lieutenant. Because there's a bunch of combat tricks and stuff, but I don't think that alone warrants Intervene. I'd rather play the card we're going to add later. But let's get to the ads. First one, my favorite piece of fluff, my favorite prowess trigger, Gitaxian Probe. It costs nothing. It is so free. It's not even funny. And it will help smooth out your draws.
Git Probe is so good. You could either get 2 spells turn 1, or you can just chain it later with those prowess triggers and make your entire board huge. I know you love Git Probe so much.
Plus, with a very aggressive deck, being able to look at the hand of the trickiest player and knowing that shields are down or knowing that you have to beat a Flare of Malice out of them, it definitely changes the math. And let's go for that counterspell. I love an offer you can't refuse. I think this even has sort of niche applications for being aggressive because you can play a 1-drop, counter it with an offer just to trigger prowess, get two treasures back, and stay even on mana while getting 2 prowess triggers. That's not going to happen very often, but I think it's infinitely more relevant than like Intervene plus Feather, and I think it's also just going to help you stay alive. Keep your 4 or 5 or 6 creatures in play, because once you beat down once or twice, they're going to try to wipe you, and you need to have an answer for that, or else you're going to fall way behind, especially without signets.
I mean, I love the cheap counter spells. They're so useful, especially if you are trying to go off with a bunch of non-creature spells. And because it's so cheap, I love the fact that not only is it cheap in mana, it's cheap in price because of its reprint and foundations.
Now for that card that looks terrible side by side with Elemental Eruption, but Goblin Wizardry. I've been pretty happy with it. Blitzflix, this fits your theme perfectly because they have prowess. I've been pretty happy with this. Even if on an empty board, end step Goblin Wizardry can actually get you to like 3 to 6 damage, or 6 to 8 damage when you untap and start firing stuff off. I have been happy with it. I think it's more castable than the Eruption, and I think I'd rather have worse tokens sooner versus like a 4/4 or 2 4/4s when it might not be relevant.
I have admitted the goblins with prowess have been very annoying.
Especially with Balmor.
And pretty relevant, too. The next card is Expressive Iteration. I feel like this is just a slam dunk in is it spellcaster types?
Yeah, you really need to make sure you never run out of cards, because then your spell slinging comes to an end and your deck totally rolls over and dies. So some of this stuff is like, I want to keep the card draw up. Even though this deck had it, I want to maybe end up with +1 or +2 just to have that keep going. But let's talk about those board wipes. Board wipes we can play and still win the game and still push through damage and not have to just go full turtle reset mode. I want Volcanic Torrent in this deck. We got a couple cost reducers. Blitzflix, maybe you want to consider a couple more in the future, but being able to deal 2 damage minimum to everything your opponents control, but we're going to be swinging spells before that. So with Narset or whatever, it can be 4 or 5, and now we get 3 prowess triggers or 2 prowess triggers off this at bare minimum. I love it.
It's so good. Delayed Blast Fireball is also a great one. If you cast it from exile, you're definitely getting a lot more damage. But even if you have to cast it for its mini mode, still pretty playable.
It's very playable. I think also really, really good with Volcanic Torrent, but really good with your commander, Narset. I had to look this up. I wasn't sure if copying the spell from exile and then casting it counted, but from everything I could find online, you can cast Volcanic Torrent to deal 5 damage off of a Narset trigger. So, yeah, please, let's get that in there. That's like a win con almost. That card's ridiculous. As for a little more interaction, a little more card filtering, I think Prismatic Command is going to be great. I struggle to not play this card in pretty much every Spellslinger deck.
Prismatic Command's really, really good whether you need to ping a little bit of damage or you need to make a treasure. I feel like it's really good for clearing out those tiny blockers, and then you can punch in with Narset, giving everything prowess, and then maybe if you have a combat trick with the treasure you make from it, that could be a really good like 1-2 punch.
Yeah, something you'll find that I think is a play pattern this deck will use is with a cost reducer, you have a 2-mana Prismatic Command, you draw 2 cards, discard 2, or whatever, kill something, then make a treasure. Then when Narset casts it again, you make another treasure, and you're net even on mana, but you got other effects out of it. We're also going to add Flare of Denial. Yes, we need to protect our board. We've got a bunch of like 2-mana, 1/3 prowess beaters, and when they've, used up their welcome, we are still going to be able to tap out every turn. We can sacrifice one of them, stop that board wipe that we know is coming.
Look, not every free counterspell is a game changer, and this is one of the best ones that I don't see played that often because of the lack of creatures in blue. But your deck is one of the best ones to run it.
This card's like $4 also. I mean, what a steal. Like, Flare of Denial is amazing for $4. And next we're going to do Soulscar Mage. I think this is a sweet one. You're already playing the Storm Chaser's talent that just makes a 1/1 prowess otter. I think Soulscar Mage is pretty sweet. I think there's not a high amount of the damage cards for it to synergize with the -1/-1s, but in terms of just curving out and beating people up, I think you want a 1-drop with prowess. And now I've added Volcanic Torrent and Delayed Blast Firewall, which go ham with this and turn it into like a Black Sun Zenith.
No, it's so good in this deck. I love how this deck is kind of like coming together with all these creatures.
Yeah, and for fun, I had to throw a new one from Tarkir Dragonstorm, Frostcliff Siege. This is a weird opportunity where we were talking about this, and I was like, man, it's awkward. Because if you're playing green, you might not play this card. This is the deck that wants +1/+0 haste that isn't green.
I love this. They haven't even seen the video that's coming out in.
Trample, baby.
But this is going to be so good here because you're punching, you're slinging spells. You are able to take advantage of all of the modes that this has to offer.
Yeah, so we sort of switched around some of the higher curve things, brought it down, figured out what are some of the weaknesses of this deck. We're going to be expecting at least a board wipe before we can win. So adding some more ways to counter those board wipes. I mean, we're +2, right? We're +2 ways to counter a board wipe for very few mana because we only cut Intervene, and that can't stop board wipes. The old average mana value for this deck was already really low. It was 2.38. And since we cut 3 6-drops, it's now 2.24. So we're just winning. We're just getting even lower curves, even faster beatdowns.
You're going to be spitting out creatures left and right and chaining together all these combat tricks and punching for so much. I think this deck is going to be spicy. On the spicy end of bracket 2, at least.
Just like Moxfield's the spicy end of deck building, because if you're wasting your time with Redacted, not figuring out how their confusing UI works, not figuring out how to click or follow anything, it's just too confusing. Moxfield's lays it out all for you, very neat. They don't yell at you, very calm, very clean environment, and I think you're missing out if you're not using it.
If you want to see any of the decks we have ever audited, including these, you can actually find them on NN Deck Audits, our second Moxfield account.
And because Moxfield is so useful, you can scroll and click View Recent Activity, and it'll tell you the changes we made. Usually with an audit, there's 10 in, 10 out, and it's perfectly listed there for you. Just an amazing website.
The next deck is built by also Blitzflix, and it actually revolves around banding, which is super cool. This is built around Adventurer's Guildhouse, Seafarer's Quay, and Mountain Stronghold, which gives banding to legendary creatures.
Those lands also don't tap for mana, so we are going deep into the banding rabbit hole and hopefully coming out with some W's. This is a bracket, I would say high 2, mid 3. It's got a game changer in it, but it's Surrak Dragonclaw. 2 blue, red, green for a 6/6 flash. Spell can't be countered. Creature spells you control can't be countered, and other creatures you control have trample. Now, I'm not going to get into this too much, but trample plus banding on offense can be very good depending on what your opponent has to block with and how assigning combat damage is going to happen. There's other ways to do it, but genuinely, don't worry about it. Blitzflix has it figured out, and he's going to be banding, and we're going to be talking about what the game plan of this deck is and how to improve it under these restrictions.
The game plan is to get out those special lands to give everything banding and make sure we have a lot of legendary creatures out so we can just have the biggest bans possible. We want to exploit combat on the offense by giving creatures trample, and then we want to deal the rest to the defending player. The nuts for this deck is that we want to optimize with synergistic staples, not just super staples, and there's no budget in general, but if it's a $40 card, it better be doing $40 worth of work. This deck can go very fast too. The optimal start is turn 1 Forest into Delayed Halfling, turn 2 into Kinnan, the only game changer, into an untapped land and bop. Already you have 7 mana right there. And turn 3, you can go with a banding land, doesn't produce mana, but that doesn't matter. And you can put out Itali Primal Conqueror on turn 3 at that point.
And at that point, I understand that those cards are all broken, but we've now set up our band to actually get the banding thing ongoing. And so Seafarer's Quay actually wasn't included in the original list. So you're adding it just because that's another land that does what we want, and then just treating this like an audit with 101 cards.
Yeah, so the average CMC in here was 3.22 without lands, and the median CMC was 3. There was 36 creatures, 9 sorceries, 5 instants, 4 artifacts, 8 enchantments, and 41 lands. Let's talk about some of the removals and the adds. For some of the cards to remove, one of them was Lightning Bolt. I feel like this is such a 1v1 card, and I'm only playing it in CDH when it comes to actual removal.
And I think green and blue give you a couple more efficient ways to take out creatures that I'm not going to super duper go on Lightning Bolt. We also got Instrument of the Bards. It's a way to sort of like scale up like a Yisan kind of effect, and I think it just wasn't effective enough, right?
Yeah, and the next one is Trail Tracker Scout. Mana Dorks are very important to ramp in here, but I feel like 2 mana Dorks aren't where we want to be unless they have some big upside, and the only upside is when we spend 8 mana for this guy.
Yeah, same thing with Radical on Mystic. We're going a little quicker on the cuts because I think the ads are a little more interesting as to like what these can offer and what kind of legendary stuff we're doing with these ridiculous lands. We also cut Lightning Greaves. How about that one?
I think Lightning Greaves just is not that important in this deck just because I feel like Surrak is a finisher, and with Flash, you don't need to protect him for that long if you're swinging in for the win anyways.
Surrak's also not one of those cards that I think is like the most insta-kill, you have to beat it or you lose. He's kind of just stats, and I think that makes him a great choice for a commander where you want a trampler out all the time.
Yeah, the next one is Maeve, Insidious Singer. This is a goad card that is a legend, but I don't think it's the best on offense or defense, and I think its ability is a little bit expensive to be paying into. If we're ramping, we want to be ramping into big haymakers, and probably not something as much as just like goad target creature.
Yeah, I don't think she's somebody I really want in my band too much. Roxanne's a pretty great card, though, and I think that maybe she just is a little expensive for a legend. I think we can maybe get our legends a little cheaper. Is that what we were going for?
Yeah, I think that also when it comes to damage, I think we could just be dealing damage with our creatures instead of meteorites here and there. We're ramping very, very hard in the beginning, so we don't need to ramp in the mid game either. There are also 41 lands in here, so I cut Island because I think we can rock with 40. And War Room, we have 39 at this point, but we had to add one back because of the Adventurers Guild banding type lands. And War Room is 3 mana, 3 life for a single card. I think that is a little bit rough in the Teamer colors.
Okay, yeah, and it's also a colorless land when we're already playing lands that don't have for mana, so it can be a little bit dicey. And the Reality Chip, I like this more in the Artifact Synergy top card, shenanigans decks. We're not really going to configure it because you kind of want the legend out.
Yeah, so I don't think it's the best in this, but we are moving on to our ads. One of the most important things about this deck is to get out those banding lands, so we want to find some ways to tutor it. One of them being Sowing Mycospawn. This has been doing waves in 1v1, but I think it does work here too. You play it in Belladros.
I think this card's amazing. Whether you're getting bans with legends, land that doesn't make mana, or Field of the Dead, or Gaia's Cradle, it's fantastic. It helps us get our nonsense online. Same with Pier's Whim. We're going to be able to interact with their stuff, take out some of their, granted, their worst things, but if they only have a Ristic Study, they got to lose it. And taking out some of their stuff while advancing our board state in a great way is super desirable.
And getting those banding lands right on the field. There's also Erixmathy's Slumbering Isle in here. I feel like if we want ramp and we want big boys because we're going to give them trample anyways, Erixmathy's is just a slam dunk.
Yeah, Erixmathy's, I like this card. I think this card's a little underrated. What I like to do with this card is spell, get it down to 1 slumber counter, and then just never remove it until there's a board wipe or somebody's defenseless. And as soon as I can do that, I will cast a spell, remove the last counter, and just clock somebody for 12. But I'm not just going to make this a creature on a clogged board. I think that's a mistake. And I think you just leave it at 1, and you're going to get somebody with it.
I think it's just a slam dunk when you can tap it for 2 mana the next turn it comes out. And then when your commander has Flash and it can come in and give something trample, if that's a creature on that point after you do it after the clogged board, you can swing in for a ton. So if they have a 1/1 or something, it's not getting stopped by that. You're still bleeding over a ton of damage.
It's so perfect with Surrak. I mean, Erixmathy's has 2 slumber counters. They wipe the board. End step, Surrak, untap, different spell, doesn't matter. Mana Dork, hit him for 18, just out of nowhere.
It's juicy. The next one is Old Gnawbone. I know they said if $40 good, it has to be $40 good, but I think Old Gnawbone with so much trample running around in your deck with banding is $40 good.
Right. We're trying to get them to make blocks such that we can cheese trample damage over their face, and this does give you a reward for the number of trample damage you can sneak through. I think that does make a lot of sense. Ruby's going to be in as basically a sub-in for 2-mana Dork, but it's a 2-mana legend and it just has that much more utility.
It also has haste too, so if you want to attack and abandon as soon as possible, this can ping in with a little bit more damage.
And she gets a little attack boost when she comes in.
There's also Inti Central of the Sun. This is another legend that will help you filter some cards from your hand into the graveyard and get you better cards that you want to punch with.
It's also a backup way to give trample without Surrak, right? I think it does say trample somewhere in that massive paragraph.
There is so much in there. I think it does so much work, and it's a great 2-drop. I feel like when this deck was given to us, there were a few at the top end, and so getting these little mana dorks or mana and card advantage that are at the lower end can really help set your engines up later.
All right, so I'm not gonna lie. Which one is Radha Heir to Keld? There's like 8 Radhas.
Radha Heir to Keld is a 2-mana creature that can tap to add mana, but if you attack with her, you get 2 mana instead. I think she's great for this deck. She's a legend. She helps you ramp really efficiently, and she is attacking, which is what you want to be doing with this deck to begin with. So I think she fits in very well and is a great early turn play.
Plus, if you play Radha on turn 2, you can play Surrak on turn 3, right?
Yeah, and then especially if you're attacking and stuff.
That's pretty cute. We're adding an offer you can't refuse again. We told you we couldn't refuse it, so we added it to the deck because we want to stop shenanigans. Same is true of Arcane Denial. I think when you're playing these janky Rube Goldberg A plus B plus C plus D plus E decks, you're gonna have to have this stopgap for when someone plays a Farewell All Modes and wants to reset your plan, or someone's got some kind of big bomb that you're just not ready to play against. Like if someone's trying to resolve a Bolas' Citadel or other game changer, you got to make sure you stop it because you just can't compete with that with this deck.
I also put in Finale of Devastation. I feel like since you're ramping so much in this deck, you have the mana to spare. So you get out your biggest Haymaker. You have the 12 mana to give everything +10/+10 and trample, so you don't have to be relying on Surrak if he's got sent to the command zone once or twice.
Let's finish it up with some stats.
There are 26 legends originally in here, but 27 after the audit. There were 6 ways to find lands, but we want to bump that up just a little bit more, so there are 8 ways to find it after this, and 6 overrun effects originally. Now it's 7. 3.3 average CMC without lands, and 3 median with lands, so that is about the same as when we started.
Yeah, but we didn't kill the curve or anything. We kept it about the same. Your deck's still going to be functioning, hopefully running smoothly, but that does bring us to our next deck. We've got John Copeland's Reki, The History of Kamigawa. This is a bracket 2 deck that we've tinkered over the last few months on it. I think we've come to a pretty good place. Reki's 2 and a green for a 1/2. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, draw a card. So the game plan is just gain advantage through legendary spells. Everything we could possibly do, ramp removal, card draw, I want it on a legend. I want random creatures on legends. I just want to make sure Reki is a ridiculous card draw value engine. The only notes for this was no high power tutors. That's really easy to meet, so we're just going to make this deck as cool as possible. I think the optimal start just involves turn 2 or 3 Reki, and then you're just going to play all of these legends.
I mean, there's so many cards to be drawn with Reki. I feel like just getting him out as soon as possible and then just drawing all of your cards means you will have the hand to be able to kill the table.
This deck does have a power sub-theme, sort of like making a creature's power bigger and then changing it or augmenting it or duplicating it with some other cards. So it's something to note. Some of the legends that we're going to be adding fit into that secondary theme, and I think it's good to have a secondary theme because green legends, there's like a million of them. Last 2 years, they've probably printed 1,000 green legends and colorless legends too. So giving us a little bit more direction is great, and we're still going to try to get this pseudo jank going.
But we're moving on to the cuts, one of them being Springbloom Druid. Usually I love Springbloom Druid, but we are focusing on legends here, and there are other legends that can be subbed in for this effect.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this is going to be an example, and the same is true of Caustic Caterpillar. We're going to cut non-legends, and I think there are either strictly better versions or legends that we're going to add in later. We're also going to cut Anduril, Flame of the West. I do like that it's equipment, so it can augment the power. Sir Farron's in here. There's some other cards. Wilson's a good card to make pretty big. There's a Blackblade Reforged is in here. Those kind of cards are already augmenting our stuff. I don't think Anduril gives enough of a power boost to justify the play and equip cost. We're also going to cut Soul Guide Lantern. Stone of Eric is in here, and that's legendary, and that is Graveyard Hate. So I don't think we need to double up on it, especially when this one's not legendary.
Huatu, Honored Physician, is also one of those types of legends that we can do better with.
We're gonna welcome you into 2024 and cut this card because we found a better option. Also, Eye of Vecna. Eye of Vecna just doesn't do it for me on the amount of cards we draw off of it. Yeah, we can play Reki and then play this as like a 2-mana divination, but I never want to pay 2 more mana and 2 life to draw a card. And since we're in green and we've already got a ridiculous card advantage engine in the command zone, I think this one can just sort of sit out. I don't think we're ever going to be excited about paying 2 extra mana after the first one. And this deck isn't super into playing all of the baubles that are legendary just to cycle them, so I think this can go.
Kuro the Boundless Sky is one of those cards that if you can't proactively sack it, I'm not sure if I really want it in my deck. Just because it's a green legend doesn't mean it has a home in here.
Yeah, I don't think we can really do much with Kuro. We can't force those triggers to happen, and it's not big enough in the air. I mean, we can equip it, but then all I'm playing is a flying vanilla.
Yeah, Rampant Growth is also not a legendary, so I think we can sub it out for something that's either faster or legendary.
Right, or maybe creature-based, because this is a creature-filled deck. Next, Aspect of Hydra. I wanted to keep this in, and when I got to the end, I was like, there's just no more room. I think we talked about this is a Legends Matters deck. That's plan A. This is also a power-augmenting deck. That's sort of the sub-theme. And I think like when we get into like literal combat tricks that also care about devotion to green, I think that's just a tertiary theme. It's a little too far out. I know Blanchwood Armor is also in here, but I think that's more of a static power boost. I don't think this deck can leverage a 6 damage boost. You know, if this was +6/+6, I think we're already kind of lucky with that. I don't think that's that good. I don't think it's good enough.
Yeah, Hilda's Crown of Winter, I do not think works the best in this deck too, especially since it's not a creature.
It can draw cards, and tapping things is a little tricky, but it's also on board, and it doesn't feel like it's in the wheelhouse of like big green punch your face. But let's get to some ads. Now we cut Springbloom Druid. Sutina, Speaker of Tadru, is perfect. It's just a Farhaven elf, and it's legendary. For whatever reason, from the jump start, they wanted to make it legendary. Amazing.
I really like this in my Elf Ball deck, and I hope it has a great home here too.
Now it's just drawing a card on top of whatever else.
There's also Excalibur, Sword of Eden. This is an Assassin's Creed card, but it can be cheap or even free if you have enough historic permanents out, which your deck is filled with.
This one is another one that's like, oh my god, it's right up there with Blackblade Reforged. It's probably better in terms of like making this huge thing. I'm imagining like a Wilson or a Sir Farron wearing this, pumping something else, that much power. And then we'll get to like the simpler legends. Susan Foreman. Hey man, let's just cut Rampant Growth and we'll just add a 2-mana legendary ramper, and she doesn't do anything else. She's just a dork, but hey, if Elvish Visionary tapped for mana, I would be pretty excited.
Also, Gulta Primal Hunger is a shoo-in because this is going to be reduced by so much in your deck, and it's going to deal a lot of damage.
Yeah, 2 of the other finishers in this deck that we'll see is, that we have, is God Eternal Ronus was already in here, and Zopandrel. They double the power, which is another reason to play these power augmenting things, because you play Blackblade Reforged or Excalibur and +12. Now, 12 more, they're trampling, they're hitting for a bunch. I think even the Peregrine Dynamo is in here, which copies triggered abilities like doubling, which is hilarious. It's so over the top, but Galta wears any equipment perfectly. It's only going to cost 2 mana, so it's on the level of a bauble. You know, Eye of Vecna, how about a 12/12 instead of the artifact?
I think that is great, especially with that trample too. Plus Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. Can you say one of the best mana dorks there is? I love Selvala so much, and you're going to be drawing a lot of cards if your creatures are gigantic.
Yeah, I was surprised that this one was in there. I think in the previous audit, I must have assumed it was in there because this is like one of the go-to green legends. Absolutely fantastic. And we cut Huatu, but we are going to add 6. Instead of putting the creature on top, we can just cast whatever creature's in our graveyard by pitching a land, and just sort of, if by the nature of playing it and attacking with it, you get card advantage by putting lands in your hand.
Tyvar the Pummeler is going to be an overrun type effect, and he also makes himself indestructible, which makes him very, very hard to kill.
Yeah, we get another overrun on a legendary creature that cares about the biggest power. It feels custom built for this, especially when we start adding Excalibur and when we start adding Galta in. And I did cut the Caterpillar because Insidious Fungus, I think, is just strictly better. If you don't care about types, it's got extra toughness, and it can replace itself by drawing a card in addition to everything Caterpillar can do.
Delayed Halfling is so good in this deck too because all of your legendary stuff, you don't want it countered, right? Well, what if so many of your deck was legendary that this just said half your spells can't be countered, or most of your spells can't be countered?
Right. Plus, critically, I was talking about what our best draws are, and I don't think it's realistic to cast Reki before turn 3 with this deck. But so I want to add a couple 1-mana dorks, and maybe you could even add more, John, to go now my optimal draw, maybe I get 6 dorks on deck. It's tough to find room, but if you get 6 dorks on the deck, that does let you play Reki turn 2 most of the time.
There's also Utopia Sprawl. We do want that 1 mana ramp
Yep.
if we can help it, and this sticks around after board wipes too.
So there were 42 legends in this deck before we upgraded it, and now we got to squeeze in just that extra little bit of value. There's now 44. In parentheses in the script, I wrote value.
There's the old AMV was 2.89, and the new is 3.15, a little bit higher, but 3 with Galta at 2 CMC. Galta really brings that up a ton.
Yeah, Galta realistically is not a 12 mana card. So if you count Galta as 2, then we've only raised the average mana value like 0.11. So I think you're going to be set up. So this is the type of stuff we're considering when we're trying to keep the core identity of a deck while also upgrading it. Hopefully you got something out of this. And if you want to watch more of us upgrading decks, well, you better watch this video.